whānau, welcome to episode 5 of the Paul and Henry Show. That's Paul and Henry talking about stuff that you might like to know about. Today we're going to talk about this beauty, the Compliance Response Framework. It's hot off the press. It came out last week, so we're going to talk you through this document, what it means to have it, why we have it, and then we'll get into some of the detail around the thing as well. Anything from you, Henry, before we get into it?
Oh, just to comment, a bit of feedback for you, Paul.
Oh, thanks.
Well, it used to be stuff you should know.
Oh, what do we
Then
change
it was
to
stuff you should probably know,
Now
and
it's
today it was stuff you might like to know about.
This is stuff
can I be more
this is
assertive
stuff
than
you
that?
definitely need to know about.
This is stuff you must know.
Okay, we've nailed it. Henry, you heard it from Henry. You must know this. Compliance Response Framework. Why would we have it? Essentially, every modern regulator has something equivalent to a Compliance Response Framework. MPI have their VARD model. Maritime New Zealand has its compliance operating model. IRD have a fancy model. I forget what it's called, but it's very good. So it's really just part of being a modern regulator. You need something that draws together all of the things you need to be thinking about when you're making a decision on how you respond to something and sets out the framework for that to happen. And the reason we do that is to bring some greater consistency to our decision-making process. And it's to ensure that when we're making a decision, we're using the right tool at the right time for the right impact. Those big 3 things that come out of Te Waka Kotahi. So one of the other things, and we've talked, I forget which episode it was, we talked a lot about decision-making. This kind of confirms many of the things that we talked about in there and sets it out in writing to go, hey, this is the stuff that you need to be doing when you're making a decision. That stuff around good record-keeping practices, making sure you've got the right level of delegation, making sure that you're the right person, how you might go about getting some support or some guidance on how you should make your decisions, and ultimately who's responsible for what. So that's kind of all set out in this document. Any comments from you, man, on this so far?
Yeah, just to say, you might go, hold on, we've got Te Waka Kotahi, and now we've got this. What's the relationship there? Well, it's explained in the document, and we draw on Te Waka Kotahi.
Yep.
But if you think about Te Waka Kotahi as the strategy, and that's about the big vision and the big picture and journey, this is a framework document for you to help you make individual decisions. So it's more of an operating policy and procedure than a strategy document, which is Te Waka Kotahi.
Yeah.
But they definitely should be sitting together.
You made me think of a really good point there too. This is written in a way that you can use it frontline, boots on the deck, having to make a decision then and there, or you could equally use the same principles in this to make a great big decision around a big, broad systemic problem that has a whole panel of people sitting around to talk about it.
Agreed.
I just want to touch on the definitions a little bit. We had a really cool 2-day session at the senior leadership team and a bunch of support people as well, to work out what do we really mean when we use these terms, because it's important we get consistent in our thinking around those terms. So we came up with Compliance Response Framework, and when we're talking about compliance, we're talking about any activity that the regulator undertakes to ensure people meet the rules, exceed those rules, or meet any outcomes that are prescribed in any outcomes-based legislation. And when we talk about response, we're talking about not just the reactive stuff, something's happened and we're responding, but things are going on and things are happening, and we need to, in some way, act on those things or act towards those things as the regulator. So we could do that in a proactive sense. If we start to see an emerging trend of harm, our response might be to put in place an education program, which we would consider education, engagement, and enforcement to fit under that bigger, broader umbrella term of compliance. So those 2 words, Compliance Response Framework, right tools, right time, right impact, should be on the front cover. Some earlier editions of this came out with a typo in there. If you've got those, please put a pen through it. Should we get into the heart of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so at its core, the Compliance Response Framework suggests that you look at 5 things. You should consider 5 things when you're thinking about how you might respond to or deal with something to ensure that you've got the right tools, right time, right impact. The first of those, the risk of harm. Now, when you're thinking about that, you should be going, is the risk of harm, and this isn't the consequence of harm, is the risk of harm minimal? Is it low level sort of one-off paper cut stuff? Or is the risk of harm really significant and widespread? Is this, and slips, trips and falls is a really good example. The risk of harm is reasonably low. If you look at the stats, it's a sprained wrist and a few bruises. but actually it's a broad, widespread problem
Yes.
that collectively starts to create a problem. The next thing we look at is conduct, and this goes towards the intention of the conduct as well. So is the conduct accidental, one-off sort of stuff, or is it a deliberate and intentional course of action over a longer period of time? Can you think of some examples of that?
Yeah, I was just thinking actually, and it goes to the risk of harm as well. So you
Yeah.
might have an isolated incident that
Yeah.
was a genuine mistake, but it's in a really high risk area where we just
Yeah,
cannot tolerate mistakes, like some of our heavy vehicle and rail things,
Yeah.
versus people who are continuously, failing coughs and just continuously running their tyres down until seeing
Yeah,
how far
yeah.
they can push it.
So I think for me, the one would be a logbook.
Yeah.
Someone's made a genuine mistake, one-off in their logbook, as opposed to let's get together and have a conspiracy on how we can defraud the system by creating false logbooks.
Yeah.
The other thing that we should encourage people to look at, the third kind of pillar of this decision-making process, is the person's attitude to compliance. Now, importantly, that's not their attitude towards us or their attitude towards any other regulator. They might be absolutely horrible to deal with, but fundamentally really safe and have a good approach to regulation.
Yeah.
So you need to think about the attitude to regulation. You talked about someone
We've
who's
talked about this before, I think.
consistently
Yeah.
not failing their coughs, consistently not paying their RAC, consistently having maintenance problems.
Yeah.
Regulation is seen as a burden and something an operating expense that they have to do, as opposed to going, we're going to be as safe as we can and exceed all of these requirements. Another thing too, I think that should feature in the thinking around the attitude to compliance is how willing are they to engage with the regulator. So at one end of the scale, you would have people who would be coming to us and saying, we're forming a lobby group or a business group, an interest group, because we want to improve safety in this particular area, and we've put together this safety council and we're all actively involved in it, and we want to support you in lobbying the ministry for legislation change.
Yeah.
As opposed to other people who won't even return our phone calls.
Yes.
Yeah, or worse.
Yeah.
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 The public interest test, this is one that often gets confused. So this is the fourth pillar that we have. What does that mean, Henry?
Yeah. So this is about us acting in the public interest. Does our response benefit the general public? And for me, the first thing that's about is safety. But we've already talked about that with the risk of harm, which is the first factor that we're looking at. But this allows us to think about other things, other sort of greater goods that we regulate for and that our response could help with. Now, it's not things that the public are interested in because they are particularly exciting or interesting, but that sort of greater good. And I think a really clear one is the level playing field. Particularly with road user charges, not paying your road user charges, it does create a safety risk because it means we don't have the money we need to run a safe land transport system. But really, it's unfair on those other operators who are paying their fair share, that there are other people who are not. It's just not fair, and the public has an interest in a level playing field. It also means, in some of the other work we do, I've dealt with scenarios where there's only about a dozen people that we license or give a particular exemption or permit to, and one of them will come up with some innovation and say, can we get our conditions changed to let us do this? And we'll say, yeah, that's fine. I think the next thing we need to think about is, well, should we give all those other people that same change to their conditions? And what does the greater good require in that scenario? So thinking about that test, how does our response benefit the general public?
The one I often hear people get confused with is how interested the public are in it. So they go, oh, the public interest is low, there's been nothing in the media. Actually the public interest might be really, really high. And I think too, sometimes when the public interest is really high and done well, the public don't even know that they have an interest in that.
That's right.
All right. And the last one, the fifth pillar that we've put in there in this decision-making model is our Te Ao Māori principles of Tuaki Tumaya. I'm not going to go into those now because I can't profess to be an expert in those things at all, what we are going to do is have a separate episode, and we'll get Erin Wilson along to talk about the Te Ao Māori principles of Tuaki Te Moa, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah.
It'll be cool to have him here.
Yeah.
So once you've weighed up all of those things and you've gone, what is the risk of harm? What is the conduct? What is the attitude to compliance? What is the public interest test? How does this fit with our Te Ao Māori principles? There's some other things then that you should be thinking about as well. And these are things like, once you've arrived at sort of what you think your response should be, how you should deal with or treat the issue that you have, is doing this going to serve it as a deterrent to other people? Is there a deterrent factor that actually makes it worthwhile doing? Is doing this going to make compliance really simple for people? And I like to use that term rather than making compliance easy for people, because that can be confused with lowering the bar. Compliance should be simple. So
Simple.
if we're dealing with an issue and we're going, hey, these are well-intended people, and a whole bunch of them can't seem to get this right because our rule is too difficult, then perhaps the right response is to go, look, we need to fix our rule.
Yep.
Yeah. And does what we're doing support the people who are actually trying to comply? So we shouldn't be putting regulatory hurdles in the way of people who are genuinely wanting to do the right thing, are capable of doing the right thing, but we just create some impediment for them in some way. Yeah,
that's right. Particularly where people say that they think they found something that's safer or just as safe, but it's got other benefits, and for some reason our regulation or conditions don't let them do it. I think we should always hear them out.
Yep.
Obviously scrutinise what they're saying, because they might be wrong about the safety aspects, but that's one way where we can help those people who are trying to comply.
Yeah, and that's what we have an exemption process for in some areas, don't we? So
that's
if
right.
actually you want to do something that's better than the rule, but the rule stops you from doing it.
That's a classic example of an exemption, is where it's actually better and safer than what the rule provides for.
One of the other things you need to think about is my response going to reinforce our credibility as a fair and firm regulator? And sometimes that can be quite difficult, because you have to hold the line and you can't resile from doing what the right thing is, when it would actually be quite easy to do that. It'd be an attractive, easy option to do that, because it's going to be a whole lot of work and effort to hold the line. But actually, if you let that person get away with it because it's too hard to do anything, you're starting to undermine that credibility of being firm and fair, aren't you?
Yeah.
Just talk a little bit about timing. So sometimes your decisions, and we've designed this compliance response framework to deal with that broad range of things we talked about before. But importantly, sometimes you're going to have to make decisions with limited information, and you're going to have to make them very, very quickly. And that's mostly the case when it comes down to an issue involving safety.
Yep.
And that's where a document like this is great, because you can go, okay, on the facts that I know them to be now, what is the risk of harm? It's imminent.
Yes.
Yeah. What's the conduct? I don't really know, but the risk of harm's still imminent, so okay. What's the attitude to compliance? Well, these guys look like they're trying to do the right thing, but the risk is still pretty imminent.
Yes.
What's the public interest? The public have a genuine interest in this not happening, because it's going to be a drain on our transport system. Te Ao Māori principles, seems to align there. There's your that should really help shape your decision. And if you make that decision then and there, and you document that decision and couch it in terms that align with the compliance response framework, you've covered yourself.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's a really good example to illustrate that these are factors. These are all considerations or things we take into account. And they're not like criteria or a checklist where you go through and tick them off.
Yeah.
Or you have to
get a
score or weighted average. It is a little bit of sorcery of mixing them all together, and what's the right weighting and what's the right mix. And in that example, the risk of harm is so imminent, that gets such a heavy weighting that we can acknowledge there are other factors at play, and there might be other factors that suggest we should let things play out and stand back. But we can use this framework to go, well, in this case, we are so concerned about the risk of harm that that has been the dominant motivator for our intervention. So that is quite I find it challenging. I know everyone else finds it challenging when you've got this factor-based decision making where you have to consider all of these factors and they could point you, for and against things as well. You have to consider both sides of each factor and then weigh them all up. But if you're struggling with a decision, I think one way to think about it is, well, which of these factors should be the most important one here? And where it's risk of harm, I think that one will shine through.
Yep.
Other times, that public interest consideration might help you to go, well, yeah, what do the public expect of us in this situation?
So what if
we've heard a lot from the regulated party, and we really know what they think. But what would the public expect of us?
Yeah. That's the person in the street test, eh?
Yeah.
If I went and asked someone down here now at Chews Lane, hey, what do you think about, this guy has his $5,000? Should we wipe it? They'd be going, why?
Yeah.
Why would you? I pay my tax. Why would you wipe theirs?
Yeah. That's right.
So that's kind of at the heart. Those decision-making factors are at the heart. I just want to reinforce Henry's point. It's not an algorithm. It's not something where you score it here and then you get to here or whatever. Yeah. You think about all these things kind of individually, but collectively as well.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing is, of course, this is a framework for all of regulatory services and all of the decisions that we make. And obviously it will be applied differently in different contexts. And when it comes to decision making, you might have statutory criteria or factors in legislation that you have to take into account, and you have to take those into account as well.
Yeah.
But I think the themes of all of those things in legislation will come through in these five, particularly in the risk of harm and public interest, attitude to compliance. But just to remind people, you need to think about how this will fit into your statutory decision making and your part of the group.
We've got a proper change process to go through and a plan to sort of roll this out. We don't need to talk about the practicalities of that in this thing. This is about getting you familiar with what the content of it. I think we've talked about the guts of it enough. The heart of it really for me is these pillars. At the back of this document, we've set out a table which is it sets out some of the common tools that we've got and how we might use those. And we've illustrated it with the Braithwaite triangle, showing kind of these are the tools we've got at the harsh end of this, at the pyramid, for the people who really deserve that type of treatment, right down to the middle, and then the bottom layer of stuff. What we haven't done is try to list every single interventional tool that we have in statute, because that would be volumes and volumes of pages.
Yeah.
We've fleshed out what we think are the ones that are commonly used.
Yeah.
So please, if there's some in there that you're not seeing, it's not because they're not important, it's just they're probably not one of the real common ones. And we've provided links to some statutes that you might find, and some legislation that you might find worth getting familiar with. So if you understand the legislation and you understand your powers well, you're making your decisions and you're responding in the context of the compliance response framework, you'll be doing a bloody good job, and we'll be a long way towards being a modern real-world regulator.
Indeed. Thanks, Paul.
No, thank you. I don't think there's anything else. I just encourage you, please have a good read of it. Have a discussion with your colleagues around, with your managers, team leaders. Just let's get the conversation going around it. Start using it. If you've got any questions, feel free to get in touch with me or Henry. I think there's an email too that we've got for questions on this stuff. I'm getting the nod from Jenna. She's going to put that at the end of this video. So that's all from me. Thank you very much. Ka kite.